welcome to My Bookcase Slays. I'm your host, Melissa Westermeyer. This is a podcast where we discuss killer books with writers and readers. Today, I'm super excited to talk to Brandy Schillace, the author of The Dead Come to Stay. Welcome to the podcast, Brandy.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
Brandy, when I started reading the book, I didn't realize that this was number 2 of a series, and I will go back and read the first one. I don't know that readers are necessarily super disoriented by that reading this one second, but I want to talk to you about the complexity of this character solving mysteries, and we'll talk about the mystery too, but let's talk about first this complexity of Jo Jones, your primary sleuth.
Sure. Yeah. So Jo Jones, and I agree with you. I wrote the second book. I wanted it to work as a standalone. And so I worked really hard to make sure that you weren't super disoriented at all. Like I really worked to make sure that you had a good enough backstory, but that I didn't give away the mystery of the first one. In case you wanted to go back and read it, it doesn't spoil the first one. But yeah, Jo Jones she's in her back half of her 30s, right? She is divorced. She's somebody who lost her marriage, her job, and her mom basically within a couple of months of each other. And that's because she had a very controlling husband who she's autistic. I should mention that first. She's neurodivergent, but the fact that she's autistic isn't the most important thing about her necessarily, but it does really shape the way she sees the world. And to suddenly have this dearth, right? She had to change homes, and she loses her mother, and she's feeling very at loose ends about all of these things and having to kind of recreate herself as a single woman, as a woman who can claim her autism because she was sort of suppressed by her ex-husband. And she finds out, somewhat to her surprise, that her mother's been keeping secrets. And one of the secrets is that she has family and an inheritance in the UK. So she's leaving the United States to be a fish out of water in the UK. And she arrives into this very, very this world, which is really different. And I actually did that. I lived for some different times in my life. I've lived abroad, and it's like it's almost the same, but it's not. So the incongruities really stick out. And of course, as an autistic person, I feel like a fish out of water anyway. And so not only was I like the weird American in the UK, right? I was also the autistic weird American in the UK. And I brought that into her character, even though we're not the same personality wise, but I wanted to bring that in, and that sense of, gosh, how many women out there have been in a position where they have to reinvent themselves in their latter 30s and life is suddenly different? And what does that look like from the inside? And what does it look like from the outside?
One of my favorite parts about reading her character was discovering the way she processed the world around her, the way she thought about things, what struck her as important, and what she disregarded. I don't want to say ignored because she's aware of everything, but she disregards some information, and then other information she really clings to, and the way she processes things differently. And I appreciated how you as a writer took us through her thought process to help us understand her character better.
Temple Grandin, who is the famous autistic writer, once described herself as being like an anthropologist on Mars. And I felt that a lot. I felt very seen by that comment, because you are someone who spends a lot of your time as a neurodivergent person translating yourself for other people. And so I've made like a study of human nature, right? I've watched other people my whole life trying to figure out not only how to fit in, but also when I don't fit in, how to translate the gap. And that actually became really, really important for how I developed her character. And in fact, I think in developing characters in general, because you are taking something from inside your head and you're putting it out in the world, which I know you're a mystery writer too, and that's part of the process. So in this case, one of the best descriptions I ever heard to compare neuroatypical to neurotypical ways of thinking is that there's hubs and spokes, right? Like, so you can get from the hub to the destination in one go. You go from New York to Chicago, and it's real easy. It's just one go. And the way a lot of neuroatypical people think is more like daisy chaining or island hopping, right? You're going from here to there. You're going to get to the same destination, but you're going to take a really circuitous route to get there. And what's neat about that is it means you see a whole bunch of stuff that other people didn't see on their journey, because they didn't have to stop off in these 5 other locations of association, right? One of the stories I always tell people, I don't actually remember if I made this one of Joe's, but one of my own is I remember that the capital of Vermont is Montpelier. because caterpillars don't ride bicycles. And that is not a hub and spoke way of thinking about things.
Not at all. Not at all. I appreciated how she went about comprehending the world around her, as well as solving actually a series of mysteries in this
Mm-hmm.
book, because it's not a big book, people, but my goodness, it's chock full of questions and curiosity and drama and mystery. Truly,
And art
there's,
history.
yes, I mean, there's a mystery of her origin story, which is throughout, that's threaded throughout. There's a mystery of this painting. There's a mystery of a death. There's a murder, of course. So there's a whole lot
Mm-hmm.
happening along the way. I appreciated how the community came around her and began to understand her too, which was pretty special.
Yes, and that's something I intentionally focused on even more in this novel than the previous one because, again, as an autistic person, women are drastically underdiagnosed. And the reason is partly because patriarchy ruins everything. They weren't focused on for the longest time. They literally called autism like a man's disease. You know, they just didn't pay attention to women because if you are assigned female at birth in this world, you already are forced to bend and weave and squish to fit. So we learn masking really early in all kinds of aspects. So not just neuroatypical masking, but like just in general, you learn like, oh, don't say that and don't stand there and don't sit like that and don't wear that. You know, there's all of these things. So women tend to learn to mask earlier and therefore they're not diagnosed. And usually through a bunch of gaslighting and breadcrumbing and lots of other bad things, we figure it out later in life. But
Mm-hmm.
as an adult, there's not a lot of support. There's supports now. There's starting to be supports now for youth and in children. But you just suddenly come out in your late 30s and go, oh, I'm an autistic person. And this happens to lots and lots of people. And people are like, well, good luck. So you have to create supports for yourself. And so the community, this idea that she is collecting supportive people. She's
Mm-hmm.
divorced the not supportive person, right? And her mother's also not a terribly supportive figure who is now gone from her life. And
Yes.
she's instead gone, I'm going to replace them with better shit. Sorry, better stuff.
Yeah.
um she's going to replace them with better things, and that community aspect is great, including the potential love interest that is
Mm-hmm.
threaded throughout the book. He's learning too, so it's
Yes,
very
he
exciting.
is. He is. Well, we see right out of the gate his feelings toward her are very clear.
Yes,
She's working on her end
she
to figure out how
she
she feels.
there's I will this isn't too much of a spoiler. In the first book there's another character who kind of comes on to Jo a little bit and finally tells her that he's flirting with her, and she's like, you really need to say that up front. like I'm never gonna catch that by inference.
Yes, he's protective of her right away.
Mm-hmm.
And also a little, I think there are moments where he's exasperated by her.
Oh
She,
yeah. Well, and he's the outside view, right? Because I put you inside the autistic mind for most of the book. You see Jo. It's a two perspective novel, which has actually got me kicked out of some cozy circles. They're like, that's not how these work.
oh,
So yeah, but his perspective is on the outside, and it was really important because I thought I'm going to first put you in Jo's brain, where you're going to go, okay, I see this daisy chain of associations, and I know why she's behaving this way. Then I take you out of her head and put you in James McAdams' head, who is a detective, and he looks at her and goes, what? You know, because without, we've got the A B C D E F G, and he's got A and G, and he's going, I don't I don't see.
yeah. And the setup. Now, when you wrote the book, did you have that opening scene in mind where they're at the village fete and she's.
Someone asked me recently what comes first in my mysteries. Like, am I a plotter? Am I a pantser? Is it character development? Is it, a sequence of events? But I tend to be extremely visual. I have a sort of what they call eidetic memory, which so does Temple Grandin does too. So for me, my books come at me in a series of images and visuals, and I see events. So yes, it starts off, she's kind of at this festival, which she has somehow gotten herself involved in. And she's been looking forward to it, but she's also like, oh crap, now I have to go like people, you know. She's a bit of
Right.
an introvert, she's a bookish person, and now she has to be out here. And then through a series of circumstances, she ends up kind of the main event, and that wasn't in the plan. And I wanted you to see how she can be both really good at something and also completely at sea, sort of weirdly simultaneously. So yes, I did have that kind of in mind when I wrote.
I love how she is so in control as your story begins, because I think to present her a different way would have the reader more skeptical of her right
Mm-hmm.
out of the gate, and
Mm-hmm.
reading her as somebody enormously capable right away who does have struggles, but like we have faith in her and she's going to figure it out, and she's going to come through this okay. That's part of the cozy trope, right? Like you have,
Mm-hmm.
no matter what struggle they find themselves in, the reader has an expectation like the ending will put everything to right, and our
Right.
heroine will be standing firm on both feet,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
wounded,
And
but she's going to make it through.
and she does. I mean, in the very beginning of the first book, she's just taken a cross the Atlantic trip to start a new life. I mean, she's definitely someone who's got a lot of mocked, right? She's got a lot of strength of personality. And that's important for people to see. I do feel that neurodiverse characters, neurodivergent people as well, tend to be treated a little bit like stereotypical. I get people asking me, they're like, "Oh, so like Rain Man?" And I'm like, "No, not like Rain Man." That's valid too. There's a People call it a spectrum. What I really think a better way of looking at it is, you can have autism all by itself. You can have autism and other things.
Right.
You can have developmental disorders and autism. You can have Down syndrome and autism. There's all kinds of things that can go together. Autism by itself is disruptive enough, but
Yeah.
in the movie Rain Man, he doesn't just have autism. He has a series of conditions that they package together, and that everyone's like, okay, so all autistic people. I mean, RFK Jr. recently came out and said like we would never hold jobs or play baseball, or I don't know why baseball was in there, or that we would be a burdens on our families. And I'm like, I support my family. Like, I have multiple jobs, and at the same time, having a job and being capable isn't where your value as a person comes from either. So I think it's important to show different kinds of people doing different kinds of things. She's very capable, very together. She's reasonably financially stable. She has to constantly scrabble together to be financially stable, but she has things together in that sense. And then that frees me up to show you how her being autistic changes the way she looks at the world, even in the best of circumstances. And then there's murder. And then we see what happens after that.
Yes. One of my favorite tropes in cozy fiction, in all fiction actually, is the found family.
Mm-hmm.
And you develop that for the reader in such a satisfying way. And was there a favorite family member for you as you were writing this book?
Oh, well, so I have a big found family as well. And I just keep collecting people. And then they just become part of family. I was a neighbor named Sally, who's an elder statesman, so to speak. She's great. And people just assume she's my grandmother or mother, and we're just like, yeah, that works, sure, we're gonna say yeah. Andrea, who is like simultaneously my BFF and like my work wife and all kinds of other wonderful things, is just part of my family in such a way that we're all like trying to figure out how we can retire and live in the same place. Like myself, my partner Andrea, we're like, yeah, we're gonna make sure that happens. And it is no shade on my own family, but that found family, these are people who choose you, and it's there's something special about being chosen. I'm also adopted by my father, and so there's another aspect of like, when you are chosen, that feels different. That like you didn't just have me because like you had no choice. And found family for neurodivergent people, for LGBTQ people, this is hugely important, because sometimes we don't have that support in our own families, or they don't understand us. And actually, I have a podcast and show called the Peculiar Book Club, which is all about like bringing together kind of like authors, readers as a giant found family. So it's super important to me. And I would say in the book, probably one of my favorite characters in this one is the artist Chen.
Same. I was
Yeah.
hoping you would talk about Chen because I thought they were
So awesome, right?
so awesome. So awesome. I'm like, I want Chen to adopt me.
I know. And Chen's an artist. Her name in the book is Chen Benton Lee, and she's a transgender artist. She's in her late 60s. She is a Chinese mother and her mother remarried an Englishman, so that's why her name is kind of hyphenated like that. But she's amazing in this book, and she's an artist, and she's just so in control and in command and fabulous and wonderful. And
Yeah,
Joe's kind of enamored of her, just like,
right.
wow, she's so cool.
Well,
And
yeah.
I
I
feel that way
mean,
too.
he walks in, everybody's paying attention, right?
Yeah.
He's running it. Like, we're gonna sit here. We're
Yeah,
gonna all
I
have
know.
this.
We're gonna do this right over here. And while she's not, it's funny because in some ways they are entirely separate from the murder mystery. In other ways, they are deeply important to how things get figured out in the mystery. And so the two mysteries kind of weave
Hmm.
together in the
They
story.
really do. Yes, I found the constant ebb and flow of information from one storyline into the other really satisfying. Let's talk for a moment about the Syrian art and
Mm-hmm.
the refugees that you wrote into the story, because you elevated the conversation about neurodivergency, but you also elevated the conversation about our treatment of refugees and newcomers in different places, what they struggle to do to
Mm-hmm.
adjust, and also what they leave behind and
Mm-hmm.
the value of another culture that they leave behind.
Yeah. So I was asked by someone, they were like, you put an awful lot of reality in this book. And I thought, well, there's a lot of reality surrounding me too. The plight of Syrian refugees in particular in this story, these are people trying to immigrate into the UK because of horrible things happening back home. And it's also a story about how their cultural centers in Syria have been looted and the artwork sold on the black market to fund more war. And so, it's this concept of vulnerability, not only vulnerability of people, vulnerability of cultural heritage, vulnerability of, this feeling of diaspora and displacement. And I wanted to get that in the story because I think there's all these vulnerable people, right? If you're neurodivergent, if you're disabled, if you're transgender, if you're gay or lesbian, etc., if you're an immigrant. And I wanted to show how different kinds of vulnerability affect people, and also that we're better together. That, pulling these people together as found family is
Mhm.
really important because that's how we strengthen each other, and that's how we sort of resist um, being abused and abuses of the system.
Would like to know, did you have to do a lot of research on the topic of Syrian artwork and this black market
So
element in
I'm
your story?
yes, I did. In addition to being autistic and having lots of special interests and hyper focus, which allows me to dig deep and deeper and just never actually crawl out of the hole again. I am also a historian, a trained historian, and I write nonfiction history books. So, in addition to being somebody who likes to study history and research it, I also have a lot of the training and the access to things. So, I did do quite a bit of research, but I think for me, a lot of that is a bit easier than it would be for, say, just anybody. And I also want people to know that when you're getting information from the book that isn't the fictionalized characters, it's like true. The stuff about the painting, the stuff about Syria, that's all real stuff that I've actually like hunted down and made sure to put authentically into the story.
That's really interesting to know. I assumed that it was, but I didn't know for certain. I
Mm.
just assumed it was true. What's next? There's another book, right? There's more to come for these
I hope
characters.
so. One of the unfortunate things of being a trade published book author is that whether or not there's another one is often not up to you. But assuming this one does as well as the first one, I'm hoping I do have storylines for the next two. And so fingers crossed that we'll see our characters again doing more fun stuff. In the meantime, I did just finish writing a thriller and I'm working on revisions for that. And so hopefully my agent will be taking that and out into the world this fall, and hopefully that'll get published too.
Wow, you've really got your hands in a lot of different writing projects then, because you've also finished nonfiction
Yeah.
like in the same year.
Well,
That's
so I actually write fiction. So nonfiction is hard. It usually involves a lot of like, years, often of research, expense. It's expensive travel. I'm in archives in Berlin. I've been in archive like down in basements. You're researching stuff. It's hard. It's difficult. My last book was about the interwar period, so I was also delving deep into rather awful history about the rise of Nazis, and all of that stuff is really heavy. And I spend a lot of time, like, it's part of my process to lie on the floor and cry when I write nonfiction. So I wrote nonfiction while working on it. These two books were sort of born of the nonfiction process, and I handwrite them. So I have a notebook, many notebooks actually, and fountain pens, and I handwrite my books, and then I transpose them into text. And it's a nice break from the computer when I'm working on nonfiction to write fiction with a fountain pen, feeling very, authory and cozy. And then later I put them on a computer, and then they become their own thing, kind of.
Wow, I don't think I know too many people who are still writing with fountain pens. That's really
I have so many fountain pens. It's kind of embarrassing.
all right. Let's talk about your desk for a moment. What is the most unusual thing sitting in your workspace right
Oh
now?
my gosh. I don't know. I've got like crows and
Oh,
bats and
like
this
it's like
this cool thing.
taxidermy.
I just happen to like like stuffed bats. This is a little old antique bronze holder here with a little obsidian sphere in it. I've got antique fountain pen holding apparatus items that hold
Wow.
pens, big brass kind
Ooh,
of things. This kind of ink is called writer's blood. Or writer, yeah, that one's writer's blood. And I also have a bottle of writer's tears whiskey in here, an antique typewriter. What else do I have in here? An old fashioned blotter
oh,
for
water.
an
Yes.
desk thing. I have this amazing jewelry box that I converted to hold pens and pencils, and it opens up and has multiple like things that fold out, and it's got pens and ink. And there's so much weird stuff on my desk. Oh my gosh, what a question.
That just sounds really inspiring. Like it would be hard to sit down in a space surrounded by all of those writer implements and not want to get going.
That's true. It is a very writerly space, and it's also a bit gothy in here, and lots of books. I have a library upstairs which has other strange accoutrements, including like a plague doctor's mask. If you're gonna write mysteries, you gotta. This is an
Indeed.
actual briarwood pipe, a pipe made of briarwood, the way that Sherlock Holmes would have used.
Oh, I am jealous. I want to chew on the end of a pipe stem as I write a murder mystery.
Yeah, it's pretty. I'm also quite tactile, and this also comes from autism, so it's kind of interesting. It's a bit of a paradox, I guess. We tend often not to have great tactile sense. So, for instance, I can feel things. It's not like I'm not numb in my extremities, but my tactile processes of my actual fingertips are not super sensitive. But I relish tactile experiences. So the sound of the nib on paper, the way it drags
Mm,
across a good foundation is really soothing to me. Chewing on a pipe stem or having candles lit, or I mentioned having I have these little stone spheres, and there's something just tactile and like pleasant about that really soothes me and kind of I
yeah.
think it would anybody, but I think specifically for me it helps kind of with the overstimulation. Here's one of the bats. He's my little bat friend.
Oh,
So I'm showing her a little stuffed bat right now.
that's great.
It's a choice. I don't like taxidermy because then that means a bat had to die. So I go with the stuffed bats instead.
I'm excited to tell other people to read your book because if you're looking for just a solid mystery with interesting characters, the fabulous found family, really rich characters. Not a single one was just he's a space filler or whatever. Like
Right.
everybody was so well developed. The storyline rock solid, kept me guessing until the very end.
Yeah, there's quite a few puzzles in there that you kind of solve along the way too. I mean, I tried to
For sure.
put as many puzzles that were solvable in as possible. In fact, the cover actually has hints, and the title itself is a hint.
Yes.
So there's little Easter eggs that as you read, you could be like, oh, I know what that's from.
I did love your cover. As I was reading, I kept referencing back to because it doesn't really overtly tell you what is going to be in the story, but then you're like, oh, I've seen
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because I like to solve mysteries. While there's lots of books that I read that are really kind of unsolvable and they're still enjoyable, but I wanted there to be multiple puzzles, multiple little like having inset 5-minute mysteries that you kind of work through and that you can pick up of. And if you're paying attention, the notes are all in there, so there you can solve it. You could. I haven't met very many people who have solved the big twist, but
I'm tempted now to reread it to see if there's stuff that I didn't catch first time around. Well, thank you for your time, Brandy, and I thank you too to the Authors Radio Network for producing this show.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.